What you're looking at is a clip from the 1954 animated film Animal Farm. The disruptive adaptation of the original George Orwell novel ended up defining a whole chunk of animation history. Despite the production time and numerous rewrites, the film ended up innovating on a level not seen before. It is one of the most important cartoons ever made, yet two of the primary creative voices responsible for bringing it to life are barely known outside of the UK. Their names are emblazoned on the film, and the producing studio follows in step. Yet the wider story of how these two came to rise to the challenge goes largely untold. Indeed, the histories of John Halas and Joy Batchelor are well worth telling. There's a lot to glean from their long, sprawling histories. But today we would only have time to take a brief peek behind the curtain. An easy place to pick up would be 1912 Budapest, Hungary, the year and birthplace of John Halas. A curious and enterprising artist from the very beginning, John initially studied animation in Paris and his native Hungary. It was noted that one of his earliest teachers was none other than George Pal, the founder of the Puppetoon studio. Known for pioneering the prototype of traditional stop-motion animation, George was able to show John the ropes to the extent of which he could start sustaining himself purely based off of his art. After a few years teaching and doing advertising work, he was able to found his own animation studio, Coloriton, with two close friends. The three of them were producing high-quality, full-color sound cartoons at a time when they were exceedingly rare due to cost. Though successful on a technical level, times were still tough, especially with the advent of World War II looming over everyone's heads. So when asked to start a studio abroad, John leaped at the opportunity. In 1936, he packed up shop and moved over to the UK to officially start work on the new studio. He would continue advertising work while also building this new studio from the ground up. While on the hunt for an assistant animator, Halas ran into Joy Batchelor, a native Briton that was knee-deep into her own commercial art career. With arguably even more experience in advertising, she got her start in animation working as an in-betweener on various projects. The two hit it off and would eventually become close collaborators and friends. Accompanying Halas on his studio work, the two would bounce back and forth between the UK and Hungary. Throughout the late 30s, their ventures saw real struggle, and after a failed stint with an art studio in Budapest, they moved back to London to settle down and try to think things over for a bit. Artistically speaking, they were a great team. Even with the knowledge that both of them had put aside various dreams and ideas in order to support themselves, they were both ambitious and innovative people at heart. Which makes it completely unsurprising that after marrying in early 1940, they would come to found their own animation studio. Though they were greenhorns within the wider scope of the industry at the time, but the choice to start the studio was likely not an intimidating prospect. Though the studio would start out working on sustainable business projects just like any other studio at the time, the namesakes for the newly christened Halas and Bachelor studio would assure that they would go on to pursue a wide variety of subjects. Early on, a lot of work taken up by commercial studios were actually government contracts. The war effort and other aggravating factors made regular productions almost impossible. So working on various PSAs or informational films and the like were an easy way to keep a studio afloat back in the day. For Halas and Bachelor, that did not mean abandoning their creative vision, as is evident in their work from that time period. Unbeknownst to the couple, this form of busy work would indirectly prepare them for one of their greatest feats yet, the production of Animal Farm. The early origins of the film itself might as well be a roving spy flick. The widow of George Orwell sells the film rights to these two undercover CIA agents. Their main mission was to fund a whole slew of anti-communist propaganda. They had a financier that was willing to fund the project, but they had a cache of funds that could only be used on productions produced in the UK. Coincidentally, a whole slew of American animators were not trusted due to the blacklist and everything, so this just kind of seemed to work out. Halas and Batchelor were officially commissioned for the project, along with several dozen animators from the dissolved division within the Rank organization. The nature of the whole commission was pretty strange, even with the added context, though the artistic teams on board were mainly there just to make solid art. Within 2.5 years, the film was finished. By late 1954 or early 1955, American and British audiences were introduced to a revised version of the original 45 epic. Being the first feature-length British animated film, it was also the highest grossing of its year. Though ironically, it did take about 15 years for it to make back its budget. This did not come at the expense of the studio's reputation, as they continued to make experimental, groundbreaking films, and even expand into television and other avenues. The studio had gotten big enough to where they started outsourcing their services abroad, but their original work was often still upheld as some of their best. The Oscar-nominated short Automania 2000 deals with the push and pull of society's advancements and the limits of human nature when it comes to constant expansion. Other feature film projects were also produced, such as Ruddigore, which is billed as the first animated operetta. It would not be a stretch to consider the 50s and 60s to be the high point of the studio's life cycle. They kept busy well into the 70s, but you could see certain things start to shift here. Sometime in the early 70s, the studio was sold off to a franchisee of what's now commonly known as the ITV family of studios. A few years after that, Batchelor would retire from animation, and the studio would go belly up about a decade after. The founding duo would keep busy until their deaths, albeit in very different capacities. Joy would continue to teach animation, while John would continue to make experimental films, one of which being a well-overdue documentary celebrating the life of one of his old mentors.
His ideas influenced the practice and attitude of fine art, photography, sculpture, stage design, topography, graphic design, architecture, abstract art, constructional design, and design education.
With the former passing away in 1991 and the latter in 1995, their vast body of work was left all but forgotten. Out of around 2,000 films, most of them now make up the glut of what is known as the Halas and Batchelor collection, facilitated by the British Film Institute. The couple was survived by their daughter Vivian Halas, who serves as the de facto studio historian. To this day, she still produces discussions and pieces of media that preserve the legacy of the legendary British studio. And that's pretty much where the story ends. Even to this day, such a long, sprawling library of films made across a stretch of 5 decades still speaks to the tenacity and the versatility of this brand. Going exclusively off name brand value, I doubt most would consider these two on par with the likes of Disney. Creatively, they had a lot in common, though it would be easy enough to argue that they actually did surpass Disney in several respects. Their film's variety in tone and subject matter is enviable, and the innovations that were made within the studio are definitely notable. There's a beauty to the nuance that their work provided, though at this point they would likely be considered small fries within the wider animation community. Their breadth of work has had a profound impact on Western animation and the international community as well. We can only hope at some point in the future that their names are acknowledged to be as important as their work.